Hi, I'm Ian. I'm standing on Indioko, a Leopard 47 deep in the South Pacific, and I'm going to show you everything Zora can do. So here we are inside Zora, and the first thing you'll see obviously is our login screen. Now you can have as many crew members as you like, customize them, give them names and positions on your crew. Today I'm just going to log in as me, Ian, the skipper. And that's going to show you what Zora can really do. So the first thing we're going to see is our PND. That's this compass looking thing here on the screen. Essentially, that is what it is. The compass is showing you the heading true of your vessel. Right next to it, you can actually see up here in the kind of bluish green text, the heading magnetic with the variation of your compass over degrees away from zero. And underneath these numbers, you can see a couple of different arrows and some animations. I'm going to break them all down for you just to get a sense of what's going on. Obviously, the heading true is the first one we're going to look at, and that is this sort of bluish colored arrow, TWD, true wind direction, and that's going to work its way around the compass to show you exactly where the wind is coming from. As you know, true wind is not something that stays constant. It does oscillate. And for that reason, we've created this spectrogram, these white lines that you can see appearing on the outside of the compass. That's showing you where the dominant area of true wind has actually been. Really, it just lets you fine-tune your sails to get the maximum out of your boat. And you can trim or even decide when to tack based on where in an oscillation of true wind you actually are. Below that, you can see another white arrow, and this one again is pointing in towards the middle of the compass. That's our apparent wind angle. Now, right now we're at anchor, so of course these two pretty much line up. However, when you're underway, quite often they will slightly separate and you'll get true wind maybe behind you compared to your apparent wind, it'll be slightly in front. Below that, we do display it as a number as well. The apparent wind angle is there in degrees. Some people prefer to use a number to understand that information. Some people like to see it graphically with the arrow. And underneath that again, in this column of numbers, is the apparent wind speed. Once you move below that horizontal line, you'll notice everything I've talked about so far is kind of up here in the world that we are in, our direction of travel and the wind. Below this line is what's happening below the water or toward the land. So first thing we're going to see is our depth below keel, dBk. This, of course, is calibrated to your boat. You have a different number for depth below keel versus below surface, for example. And Zora will use that when we come to do things like anchoring, which I'll show you later. And then we have our speed through water, which will be based on a paddle wheel style sensor or an electrosonic sensor if you have one. There are two little markings here you'll notice on this inner compass, where 0 is dead ahead and 180 is directly behind us. The green and red markings represent our rudder angle. So you'll see more green or more red depending on which way you've turned the wheel. And then lastly, at the bottom of the screen here, you see our speed over ground. Now, what's interesting is you might have noticed there's a couple of icons around on this same compass shape. Firstly, this arrow pointing away from the middle of the compass, and that's our current. So traditionally, we would display that as the direction the current is going, whereas wind is the direction it's coming to us. So I can see currently, the current is heading over to our port side. And the other icon is this small kind of wavy line icon, which indicates our tide and where we are in the tide stream. So currently the tide is going down, indicated by the two arrows. And here, or indeed over in my lower left corner, I have a hot corner here that shows me more information about the tide. I can actually select almost anything on the screen. So in the case of tide, if I tap that, I get the tide chart. And that's based on exactly where I am. In fact, if you have two tide boys that can send us data through the web, we can bring that into Zora and use an algorithm to work out exactly what the tide will be where you are. So it's one of the most accurate tide charts we can bring you. And you can do that across any day as well. So it is downloading quite far into the future. And we can update it manually if we wish, but it will also update automatically. I mentioned you can tap on anything on the screen, so if we want to find a history of our true wind speed, for example, just tap on that number, and a graph turns up to show our history of wind. So I can see that the maximum for the last 10 minutes has been around 9 knots, and it's dropped to about 7.7 knots there. What's fun about this is also on a kind of normal response rate, but you might be wanting to know what the peaks have been, or if you just want the general average. So we can go fast, we can go immediate, and you'll see that the immediate gusts have actually made it all the way up to 9.4. not that much wind today. And we can also go to slow, which gives us a more approximate average. All the time in the background, you see that faint indication of the immediate. So you can see just how much the average is averaging. While we're here, something that's quite handy to know is, again, a simple tap can do a lot on Zora. So if we want to set an alarm, for example, I'll just go back to normal. Say we've left port, everything's looking good, we've stabilized the boat, the sails are trimmed, and now maybe you're going to quickly nip inside to make a cup of coffee, or ideally you're just going to grab something you might have left on the nav station. You could set up a quick wind alarm just by tapping in this upper or lower area. So an upper wind alarm, the peak, we just tap there, the area turns yellow, and now we have a wind alarm set for 8.9 knots. We can do the same for the lower area as well, obviously, and just tap again to turn it off. If I use the plus or minus icons here, I can change the degree that wind alarm is set to quite easily. And if I wanted to be extremely accurate, I could also select the text box, and there I can actually enter it in manually. So let's set an alarm for, 8.5 knots. And there you see a new alarm has been set, and the system will notify me if the wind creeps above that. So right now the wind is down at 8, and as it creeps above, we should get a wind alarm. To save noises on this demonstration, I'm actually going to just turn that off for now, but you get the idea. A few other things to point out while we're here on the PND. We have these customizable corners. So here we have a day trip, a summary, if you will. We can see our maximum wind and speed through water. If I just close that window again, down on the lower left, we have our current, including the direction and speed. So we have direction with the arrow here, but we also have the speed available. Again, we're at anchor, there's no real current, so it's reading 0. Our GPS position. This is obviously very good to have if you need to communicate on the VHF, or if you're keeping yourself a separate manual log for fun. Zora does all your automatic logging, so quite often we find that the data there is really for us to be informed of our position, but all the logbooks are stored and automatically logging exactly where you were when things happened, so life is easy. We can also see how many satellites we've got a fix on. 22 in this case. And if you'd like the graphic that some people enjoy looking at to see where the satellites are in the sky, we do have that available as well. Actually, while I'm in this window, we also have the sun and moon charts. We can see when sunrise and set and dusk and so on will be. The phase of the moon we're in as well. So if you're planning a night passage, it can be quite helpful to see exactly what level of night light you're going to have. And equally if it's phasing, waxing or waning. We have all that ready and waiting, and obviously tide and weather is hiding there too. In the bottom right corner, we have that tide chart access and also a bit more information as to where in that tide cycle we are. So we can see in about 3 hours time, we'll reach low tide, and we should expect that to be around 0.46 meters of difference. If you're preferring distances and so on in metric or imperial, of course, that's all customizable as well. I use metric, I'm a millennial, what can I say? But if you prefer using feet, you can configure that by the user. So if you have a crew member who prefers working in metric and another one in imperial, it's not a problem. You can completely customize the system to match those needs. True wind, again, direction and speed up here in the arrows, we only have the direction, so it's nice to have the speed as well. And then up on the top right, we have the autopilot. Now I currently have this in semi-auto mode, which we kind of created, which essentially is a manual version of an autopilot. And I'll show you what that means by just tapping on it. We get this sidebar. And if I just for a moment choose, I don't know, wind angle, what you'll find is we can set the information of wind just like you would on a traditional autopilot, excuse me. However, what's added is this little blue bar at the top here. This blue bar will move further and further to our port or to our starboard, and it indicates which way to turn the helm. So currently it's telling us we have to turn the port to port. We have an alarm. Autopilot failure. An autopilot failure alarm because we're not keeping up with the requirement of turning to port. You can see the center of our PND is turned red. That draws our eye to it to let us know there's a problem. And we can see this yellow notch here is where we would like to have our wind positioned. So our apparent wind should be sat right in that yellow notch, and it's not currently. As the wind turns back, we hopefully disable the alarm automatically. However, if we don't want to hear the noise of the alarm, which will go off, as you can hear in the background, we can check on it, or indeed, as you saw on the top there, but also over here, we can hit the silence icon that says, look, I've seen it, I know about it, I'm dealing with it. In most emergency circumstances, alarms are one of the things that cause the most concern for users. A loud beeping noise is the thing that's actually going to cause you to panic more than the situation sometimes. So we did that ability to mute alarms very, very easily with a simple tap. And that's the PND. I'm just going to put our autopilot back into standby. Incidentally, I do actually have an autopilot on board, of course, and I can change my autopilot from semi-auto to our Raymarine autopilot just by tapping here. And I didn't mention it, but you do have the traditional heading, wind, and follow a right modes, and we have this feature for response time. So if we set the autopilot again to wind, and we choose the response time that we want the system to operate to. Really, really flexible system. As you can see, lots of configuration within Zora so that you can take a lot of the need to interact with your traditional autopilot helm displays. They don't need to be there anymore. You can bring them all into your glass helm experience, which is just so smooth and fully available on your phone, which is very cool when you arrive through a nice bay and people are maybe watching from the shoreline, and the idea that you can be sitting there casually adjusting your autopilot from your phone is quite special. Now, before I go any further, I just want to explain one very interesting thing, which is Zora has been designed so that you actually don't look at the incredibly cool futuristic graphics that we have. It's actually designed in 3 colors: blue, yellow, and red. If it's blue, it's information. It's just so you know about it. If it's yellow, it's a warning, and that means you probably want to think about doing something. And if it's red, it's an alert or alarm, and therefore it's telling you you need to take action. So out of my peripheral vision even, I can see that we have blue on the bottom of the PND. And that indicates that we have a depth of 9.5 meters, and it's just for my information. However, if I were to set an alarm, and let's say I set it to say I need to be notified if the depth is anything less than 10.3 meters. Now that alarm is set, instantly I have yellow, letting me know, warning, you're shallower than you have set your alarm for. And at the top of the screen I have a notification as well, and that top of the screen notification says the depth below keel is below the limit. Now, again, we can take this all the way to red, and typically when you're anchoring, for example, you want to reset your alarms. And that's something Zora does in a very, very cool way. So this is where Zora shines. Zora understands vessel states. Now, that might be an unusual term to use, so let me explain. Zora knows if we're drifting, sailing, motoring, anchoring, anchored, mooring, moored, docked, docking, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, don't worry, you don't need to do anything with that. Zora understands and then shows you what you need to know when you're doing those things. You can, however, customize each of those screens, and that's where the dynamic screen really comes into play. While we're drifting, I've told Zora I just want to see my PND because I'm adrift. I would like to see that the wind is doing whatever it's doing, the current is doing whatever it's doing. However, let's say we're going to anchor. Now, quite often when vessels come into anchor, if you sailed a lot, you come to a busy anchorage, your AIS alarms are going crazy because suddenly vessels that are usually a concern if they're maybe a mile away are now 300 meters away. So that can be a distraction. Equally, coming into anchor, quite often you're looking for shallower water because you're planning to drop your anchor. But your depth alarms might be set up for when you're passaging out on the coast where 20 meters of water is a concern because that might indicate a coral head or a rock structure you have to avoid. When you're anchoring, you're looking for something that's 4 meters deep, perhaps. So you don't want those alarms going off as well. By simply tapping anchoring, Zora resets those alarms, brings them in to be close proximity, and the same for the depth, and changes what's displayed on the screen. Now, the reason I have this is I quite often have mine set up with weather on one chart, and the satellite image for where I'm trying to anchor on the other. This means I can check as we come into anchor if I'm going to go up against the reef in favor of some shelter from the wind. If it's going to change over the period of time, I can play forward in the weather. So I can make a lot of decisions as I'm coming into anchor. And this is quite easily done because whilst I'm coming in towards anchor, over here on the right, Zora will actually display what scope is available. Now, people get scope wrong quite often, and they will do their maths based on the number they see on a display. Now, often that number is depth below keel, and your anchor roller, or your snubber, or your bridle, might actually be 6 feet higher than that. Now, if you're if you're anchoring in shallow water, that 6 feet could be the difference between a 4-to-1 scope and a 6-to-1 scope. just depending what you're doing. So in the case of Zora, it's actually doing the calculations for you and displays it based on high tide and low tide, which will also have an effect on the scope you have available. So now that we're coming into anchor, you can see on the right-hand side the scopes we could achieve. At high tide, I would have, if I did a 3:1 scope with 36 meters, I would have 2.8 to 3.1, depending on the tide cycle. Whereas if I want to be more responsible, I might say, I do nothing less than a 5:1 scope. Well, actually, 5:1 scope wouldn't be 60 meters. That would be the average. But at high tide, I'd actually have only a 4.7. So if I really strictly stick by that rule, then I need to go higher than 60 meters of chain. Now, in reality, most people would say a 5:1 is an approximation based on center of the tide cycle. So 60 meters is what we need. So as I'm coming into anchor, if you can visualize it with me, I have someone at the bow ready to deploy my anchor for me. Fantastic. I come in, I'm looking at my anchor depth. Now this is from the roller to the seabed. So I can say, okay, I need you to deploy 12 meters of chain. And the person at the windlass can do exactly that. And at that point, I say, I'm going to deploy a 5:1 scope. So they give me the call, 12 meters of chain is out. So my anchor has hit the seabed. I can then say, right, 5:1. In that case, normally you just say, right, I now need 60 meters total. But instead I can say, well, Zora knows my bridle length. So actually, person at the windlass, deploy a further 48 meters total and then attach my bridle. So deploy 12. Okay, now deploy it up to 48. They deploy that. Clip the bridle on. Okay, now put out until you've put out a total of 60. So essentially we can give the person at the windlass every number they need as they need it. And to make things a little bit more fun, if we find that actually we need to dodge a coral head or something's changed, we can manually adjust that scope by just sliding here on the slider. Once we're happy and the chain has been deployed and we say, yep, that's great, let's back up on it. Typically you'd say your anchor is set. And the new stage here is to say, right, but is it holding? Your anchor is set in front of you, that's great. Let's see if it's actually buried down into the seabed. So you back up your RPM, and again, we can see that displayed here on the right-hand side. Once we're happy that our speed over ground is 0 or maybe less than 0.5, let's say, because perhaps your GPS is rolling in the swell. If you're happy with that number, you can say, yes, we're holding, and you'll notice our chart view changes. So our PND has moved, our dynamic screen has updated, and we have our anchor radius. Now I always like to explain this. Anchor radius is kind of interesting because most apps out there and other chart plotters will simply say 60 meters from where you drop the anchor, and that's your new radius. But what if you dropped the anchor and it didn't dig in straight away? Maybe it bounced a little bit on the seabed and then dug in 12 feet later. And you were anchoring in 10 meters of water, so 60 meters radius would be if you were on the seabed. Yeah, that's the correct anchor radius. Well, Zora actually calculates based on the trigonometry of the situation. So rather than measuring 60 meters from your anchor point where you dropped and just saying that's the circle, Zora says, well, the hypotenuse of the triangle, if you like, the distance from the anchor up to you, is a different distance from the anchor straight across the seabed. 60 meters up to there is a different number. And it didn't lock in that position of your anchor until you said your anchor was holding. So even if you dropped the anchor and it skipped across the seabed for 12 feet, the new anchor position is what's stored, not where you think it is, where it actually is. So our anchor radius is pretty much the most accurate one on the market. That said, if you're like me, you're always going to put a little bit of margin of error. That's not necessarily because Zora's got it wrong, but because if we're turning in the wind and resetting, quite often an anchor will walk its way maybe a meter or two across the seabed as it's resetting back and forth. So to save any of those unnecessary notifications in the middle of the night, add a little margin of error if you like. And then finally on the dynamic screen, you'll notice that this layout has changed again. Now, a few things I haven't finished configuring for this demo, but I prefer to keep our navigation instruments up so I can see what the wind is doing and so on. But a lot of people might not bother with that. I keep the weather in place. I like to see if there's any neighbors visiting, so I can have the AIS radar up here as well, or top view. And then, as I say, the chart view with our anchor radius is on display. Now, over here is our anchored sidebar, and it shows when we drop the anchor, high and low tide. But kind of conveniently is under data, I can see what scope we put out, how much chain we put out, the bearing and distance to the actual anchor, And then the usual information about wind speed, true wind speed, and so on. Depth as well, obviously critical when you're anchoring. And that can just live there on the sidebar. So quite often we would have this on display on an iPad, or in our case at the nav station on a permanently installed screen, and we can just glance over and keep an eye on things whilst we're in here relaxing after a long day sailing. Okay, so now that we know how the PND works, why don't we show you how you'd set sail, setting up your sails, and ultimately choosing a course. So from our PND screen, we have a few different options. Right now we are at anchor. So the first thing I would do is go up to this tools button here at the top, select that I'm in anchored mode, and say, you know what, we're done. We want to clear anchor now. So all of this extra information we have available for the next high and low tides, when we dropped anchor and so on, margin for error, we can just clear that. That's going to clear our anchor, and we go back to drifting. So right now we are adrift. The anchor is off the ground, but we haven't told the system if we're motoring or sailing. Now, here on Indioko, the engines are actually directly integrated. So the minute we start the engine, a signal is sent to Zora, and our engines, port and starboard, will actually illuminate. We'll be given an RPM, and these little propellers in the middle of the PND will actually light up and start turning as well. So we know the engines are live. But rather than using the engines and motoring around, let's show you what happens if we set a sail. So here I have our current sail off, an ASIM, a Genoa, and a main. Let's put the main sail up. So a tap on mainsail, and then you'll notice here there's options, and the suggested option for the current wind conditions is 100% of our sail. It says that we're good to use that up to 17 knots. That's my chosen limit. I decided 17. I think the manufacturer of this boat suggests 20. But I like to be a bit more conservative. And then we have Reef 1 and Reef 2 and obviously drop all sails. So right now we'll take the suggestion of 100% of the sail. We'll lift our mainsail all the way up. We'll do the same for the Genoa. And again, it's suggesting with these light winds, we can go 100%. Now what you'll see is over here we now have these load bars that show us true and apparent wind, where in the window of operation this sail currently is. So given the wind is quite light, from 0 to 17 knots in the case of our mainsail, we're bang in the middle. So we're good, we're well set. On our Genoa, we can run all the way up to 23, so you can see that the power bars are a little bit on the lower side, but we have a lot of room for gusts and so on. If we had set the sail up in high winds and still put 100% of the sail up, then these power bars would be all the way at the top end, and we'd actually start getting a yellow suggestion, suggesting we might want to take a reef. You'll also notice that now that I've set the sails, up here in the tools menu, it says sailing. We are underway after all. I can add a bit more information here with our autopilot. We can control and see our rudder angle. We can also see how long we've been sailing. And over here on the data screen, I can get the kind of more traditional numeric readout for the speed we're going, the wind speed, the depth, and so on. Now, everything you see there on the right-hand side is already present in the middle of the PND. So don't feel that you have to open the sidebar to use it, but why not? It's nice to have. So again, a single tap and we can bring up any history charts, we can see what's happening, and we can just put that away if we don't want to see it while we're underway. Now, admittedly, a PND on its own, our instruments is fine, but we are sailing, we'd like to see where we are. So rather than living in our PND screen, I'm going to go up to the screens button, and this is where Zora's navigation gets a bit more complex. We actually have screens for all sorts of functions. So navigation, journal, and system. There's also custom, where we can build entirely custom screens. We're currently in the PND, and you can see we also have the option for the AIS kind of top view, the radar view that you might be familiar with, to see other vessels with AIS in range. We also have weather from windy and meteo blue. But along the top here, you can see under our navigation options, two separate screens. One, charts, straightforward charts, maps, as you'd expect. We have a satellite view here. An overlay of our AIS targets is available as well, as is our vessel position itself. Now we can zoom in and out, we can move around. You'll notice that there's a grid on here as well. All of these things we can turn on and off at will, and I'll show you that over here in a moment. Before I do so, I'm just going to show you on the left-hand side. These menus allow us to change different satellite views and chart views, obviously. We can choose from heading up or north up by tapping here. And we can lock the position of the vessel on screen using the padlock, and we can also center the position of the vessel. So if we're traveling along, we've been looking around our chart, we can jump back to the vessel very easily. And then whilst our screens are all touchscreen and designed to be used when they're wet, Some people do prefer using a button to zoom in and out for maybe accuracy, and so we do offer that as well on this little side menu bar. But if you zoom in and out, it's a nice smooth zoom, which I quite like. Now, I mentioned you can turn on an awful lot of features. So if I just zoom back to the whole atoll here, we're actually, for your information, in Minerva Reef, which is in the middle of the Pacific, South Pacific, on the way to New Zealand. So it really is a remote location. This is about all I can show you while we're here. But over here on the right, if I just tap this little handle here, it opens up a sidebar that's relevant to the screen we're on. And you can see that we can jump to our AIS targets. We can see a library of the waypoints we've created, as well as the routes. And we can download more charts. Over under navigation is where we can actually choose to turn on and off some of the data that's on display. So currently we have the autopilot up here, but perhaps I want to clean up the area, so I can take that away. All of our AIS targets, these blue lit up boats over here, we can turn them off. If we had any AIS buoys, we can also disable those. And right now we have our grid lines here. You can see across the chart, we can turn those off as well. We even have the time zone denoted, time zones denoted, so you can see when you're moving from one time zone to another. Again, selectable on the chart. Waypoints is another one. Some waypoints in this area I've been diving and exploring recently. And then when it comes to navigation, I actually simplified this before we started. We have our track, which shows where we've been, our course over ground, which is currently a solid red line. I can add on to it our headings, true and magnetic, our tack angle, because we are sailing, remember, and so this shows from where we are now. If we want to put the wind exactly in the same place on the other side of the compass, as it were, that's the angle we would achieve. And if we have a route set up, it'll take us to our next waypoint as well. We can follow a different line. Now, all of these lines, just to simplify again, we can customize them with a press and hold. And that's another rule of Zora. If you want to see settings or more information deeper than the simple graph, for example, press and hold and you'll be given a dialog box. And there we can change from time or distance, color, line style, thickness, and so on. So if you're working on a smaller screen, you can make things more fine art. If you're working on a large screen, you can give up more real estate to a thicker line, perhaps. And once you're happy with the settings, hit set and it's stuck. It stays there forever. Now we can turn off everything and just have the vessel on its own, or we could turn everything on and see everything that's happening all at once. Another neat feature of this sidebar in our chart view is weather. Now we're still working on this, but today the feature we've added is the ability to add overlays. So if I just zoom out for a moment, you'll see the edges of the satellite view start to come into perspective, but I can put things like our wind speed overlay, and I can see that we're actually in a very light zone right now, and there's some wind over here on its way. The arrows are pretty simplistic right now. You can see they're heading kind of south-southwest from the looks of it. Precipitation and cloud cover is available, and humidity and so on. And these can all be selected by different models as well. Now, we are still developing the side of weather, and there's going to be a lot more to show, but I didn't want to miss that out today. So earlier I mentioned charts. Now we have loads of functionality baked into Zora, including the ability to download charts and have them stored locally. So you don't need any internet when you're using Zora. You use it for updates and you can use it to download more chart locations. And we have charts from all over the world. However, I want to show you what we can do when it comes to routing inside Zora's charts. To do that, I'm going to head to the Screens menu and select our dedicated chart screen. It's larger, it's easier to see. Now, we are in the middle of nowhere, so it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to show you a route going across open blue water, but it is a great opportunity for me to head to the nearest large country, which is actually New Zealand, and demonstrate our integration with our partners at Aquamaps. So I can select that layer from my charts options, and Aquamaps is going to load up here, and we can see the level of detail they have is pretty impressive. They've got all the rivers and feeds here and so on. What I'm going to do is create a simple route, and we're going to head into this narrow pass here, and I happen to know there's a marina called Marsden Cove, so we're going to head to Marsden Cove as if we've just come from the outside open water. So to do that, again, Zora is either a press or a press and hold. So a press, I get some information about the coordinates wherever I tap on the map. I can zoom in and out, obviously as before, but a press and hold will bring up a menu. And here I can choose to make a waypoint, which I can save to my library, or a route, or just a straight go-to, just take me straight there. We're going to do a more complex route. So I'm going to select that, and you'll see that our routes menu opens here on the right. There's no route waypoints yet, or even a title for that matter. It's just beginning its creation. Now we have waypoint 0, it's now in place, but let's start navigating our way in. So I'm just going to use some of these helpful navigation markers to get us there. So press and hold creates a new waypoint. Another press and hold here. Let's do another one just at the headland there. In fact, I'm going to zoom in so I can see it nice and clear. We're going to go up, I don't know, up to about here. I'm going to get us just about here. And then let's bring ourselves all the way. I'm getting bored making all these waypoints. So we're going to come all the way over to the mouth of this marina here. It's kind of an interesting entrance. You go down through a narrow river to get there, but or a cut, I suppose. And then we'll just do a couple of waypoints at the sort of slight twists and turns along the way. And realistically, I don't need to put another waypoint in here because by now I'm probably in docking mode. Plus, I don't know what slip they're going to put me in. So we'll call it there for our route. Now, you'll notice I was pretty haphazard with where I dropped a lot of these waypoints. I was just kind of slapping them in as I went along. But that's because I can show you how we edit a waypoint. So if I just zoom in here on number 5, say I want to put it just here on the top of that navigation line. A selection of that waypoint highlights it in blue, and I can now drag around using anywhere on the chart to relocate it. So I don't have to have my finger in the way or my mouse in the way as I'm trying to position this waypoint just where I want it. I can actually do that by tapping anywhere on the screen and dragging around. So let's just place that nicely right there. And when I'm happy with its position, just tap away. Now it's not selected. So I can do that with various other ones. I might also choose to add in a waypoint. Let's see, where have we got? Over here, I was a bit relaxed when I decided where we were going to take our path through the narrow river area. So maybe I'll just, let's just put one here. So again, a press and hold, and that adds a waypoint in between. And you notice all the numbers have moved up one. So we only had 9 waypoints before, and now we have 7, 8, the new one, 9, and now we have 10 at the end of our route. And again, I can just reposition this just where I want it. Admittedly, with my laptop running all these recording softwares and things, it's maybe running a little bit slower than I'd expect, but it still does the job. And again, once I'm happy with that, just tap on the chart and I've deselected the waypoint that I was editing. So we have a route. It takes us, in fact, I can do a few different things here I haven't even shown you yet. Let me see. If I'm zoomed in and analyzing an area, I can select here and zoom right out and see the whole route. How clean is that? Now, if we're happy with that route, everything looks good, we can say, yep, we're going to save that. Tap on the save button. It asks us where we're leaving from, where we're arriving to. So I'm just going to say, I don't know, coastal New Zealand. And we're arriving in Marsden Cove Marina. And again, a bit of description. This is just a test route. Put whatever descriptive you like there. And then we have 2 other tabs here. We have organization, where we can actually use foldering. Now, I used to use this for foldering for country. However, you could do that by areas within your cruising ground, or I don't know, whatever, a motor sail, a day sail, and so on. We do have tags, which you can also use, and I've put a couple of these in. You can customize these by adding them to this little icon. This one is not an international sail, certainly not a long sail. There we go, it's a short sail. So we're going to call it as such, and it's going to have some motoring in it as well. So 2 tags that we can use to search later on if we want to find particular passages. And then I mentioned I used to use this country folder format, but actually we added that in because it made a lot of sense. So here it's in Oceania and it's a New Zealand sail. Now if I was going country to country, I could add it to 2 countries. So maybe I pretend for a moment that I was sailing from Tonga. So now I've got 2 countries selected. And again, later on, if I'm looking what passages and routes do I have in country A or country B and so on, it's going to be easier to find. This is also just New Zealand, so I'm going to leave it as just New Zealand. And then lastly, we have our info tab. There's more to come on that shortly. And then we just hit the save button. And that'll store that route in our library. Over here, you can see we've got quite a lot of routes I've already made, but the selected one is highlighted because that's what's on the screen. If I want to check on it, I can just tap on the drop arrow there and I can see every single waypoint. And because we're so far away and we're not moving, obviously our estimated time of arrival for each of these is 4 months. If we were underway, I'd certainly expect that to be more like a few minutes to a few hours, depending where we were, what we were doing. We'll also, when we're underway, get information about ETA for the overall journey, when we started it, time to go to the next waypoint, speed of our ground, and obviously if we have a cross-track error that we want to apply, we can put that in and save it within the settings. There are some edit menus hiding under here, so we can reverse the route. Currently, the route is animated as going from 0 to 10. However, we could set that to go the other direction if we were leaving, for example, and use the same route in reverse. The other thing we can do is up here, we can edit the label and the settings. So if I didn't like the name or the filing I used, I can change that. And you get the general idea. And so once we're happy and ready, we can see that we're obviously a long way away, but we'd hit start and our route would begin and we get waypoint by waypoint navigation. It's really that simple. You've already heard me say that logbooks in Zora are incredibly easy, and this is mainly because Zora is automatically storing so much information. If you think about it, it's already storing changes to your heading, sail changes, even watch changes with crew members. They're all automatically logged. However, because Zora is founded on traditional navigation principles, we are obligated as sailors to maintain an accurate logbook. So how do we add manual entries for additional events that may not be automatically apparent to Zora? We do that using this button up here. The log button is a press and hold to display a shortcut list of features or presets we've already created. So we can have fish on the line, we can have a squall, those kind of things. Because at the end of the day, we might be dealing with those things and not have time to create the log entry, but we want to get the correct time, the exact location. And to be honest, if I have a fish on the end of a fishing line, I'd far rather be reeling that in than dealing with typing out a log entry about it. However, you'll notice when I press and hold on that menu, we also have the option for a new log entry. And if I click on that, this form opens up and it has all the things you'd expect. The date, we can access that by a calendar. The time is a clock face, and we can also type in a title and notes, as you'd expect. We can even add a photo over here, and in the case of a laptop, it'll display a Finder or an Explorer window to find the file you want, and you can upload that into your log. However, where things get really interesting is doing the same thing, but on your phone. So when it comes to phones, if you have a smartphone with a browser, then you can access Zora as a completely independent, unique interface. It's separate from your home screens, from your laptops, from your iPads. It's just another rendering output device. And when you do logbooks in your phone with a press and hold on the icon, again, new log entry, you see the form open behind, same entry of date, time, and a title and note. However, because we're using the phone, we can tap on that text field for title, and then I can just press the small microphone in the bottom right corner. This is a logbook entry. This demonstrates a hands-free, voice-controlled logbook. It's pretty cool. And just like that, we now have a hands-free entry. We didn't have to do anything other than press that microphone and then dictate to the phone. So if we're in the middle of a squall, or perhaps we're just resting in the cockpit, you don't have to zone in on a keyboard to start typing out all your logs. You could just dictate them as they happen. And then when it comes to the photos side of things, tapping on that photo icon, it asks if you want to take from your photo library, take a photo right now using the camera on your phone, or choose a file. So if I just choose from the library, I'm just going to scroll through my photo library here, and let's see if we've got something that's kind of boaty related. Well, here's a nice sunset. So I'm just going to add that to the log entry. Now what's happening is my phone's photo is being sent through the network to Zora, and is now attached to this log entry. So when I hit save, Zora now has that photo, that text entry that we did by voice, exactly at the right time and day. Which means when I go to our actual logbook, this brings up a linear style of our logbook, and you can already see the entry, and there's our picture. So we already have everything we like: our location, speed of our ground, course of our ground, the wind, the depth, our text entry, and our photo, all available right here in the logbook. And it didn't matter which device I used to create that. Now, so far we've been looking at logbooks in a more linear format. So you can see things chronologically in this vertical timeline. And you can filter it and adjust what you're seeing using the calendar icon at the top of the screen here. And you can see the last 7 days, just today, the month. You can even set date ranges in the calendar from the 1st to the 24th. These are all available in this linear format. But today's sailor tends to like to share and relive their journeys a little bit more naturally. And a timeline like this maybe doesn't work best. So for that, we created something else. And to get to it, we head to the screens menu up here, head to Journal, and Journeys and Trips. this opens up our trips list. And essentially, this is every time the boat is at anchor, moored, docked, or underway, we create a trip. And you can see here a couple I've been testing and playing with just while I've been making these videos. So we have us at anchor, we have a short passage. If we go to the anchor we are right now, this current anchorage, I can select that and you'll notice it loads up and says we've been anchored for 2 hours and 42 minutes. It has a map handily showing us in, well, the middle of the Pacific. The nearest country is probably Tonga. And then if I get over to logs, it's going to draw from all of those logs it already has to present to us today's logs. And as you can see, I have 2 test entries, the one we just created and one I created earlier. So it is already stockpiling the log entries for this trip, this time at anchor. We can actually filter these, as I said. So here's a little filter icon. We'll start with show all. Here's everything we've got available to us, but we can then turn off some of these options. So let's turn off, in fact, let's go to one of our templates and we can just say, right, show me just the trip data. Well, this is how long you've been at anchor. That's all that matters. If I go to system data, thankfully we've had no maintenance logs or anything like that come up, so we don't need to worry about that. And in navigation, as you see, it's really just those 2 entries. If we'd made autopilot changes, there's some communication entries and so on, all easily accessed just using the filters. Now we can add to this manually one other way, and that would be to select any one of these icons in the center here and say this plus sign, and it opens the same same logbook entry. So from within a trip, we can go back and add log entries along the way as well. So it's really flexible, really easy to use way of operating our logbooks. But I did mention people want to work in a more organic way. And when you think about that, most people are going to share a journey, not a trip. A trip might be at anchor, followed by sailing to your favorite lunch destination, where you then anchor again, then you lift anchor to sail back to your home port where you dock again or anchor again. That's 5 separate trips. So we decided to combine those together into a journey, and that's accessed just over here. So these are journeys I've created at different times, going to different places, and our current journey is from Tonga, I can't even say that place name, to where we are now in the middle of the Pacific. And I can see the last sail we did, passage, was Tongatapu to the middle of the Pacific. Let's click in there and see what this summary tells us. Okay, so here we can see not only a more useful map that shows us the route we took, we can also see some of the stats from our journey. So we can see how much motoring we did, motor sailing, drifting, anchoring, and so on. We also see for how long that was, how far, the average speed of each one of those, and then it's calculated for us the maximum distance of the journey, or the total time it took, and also our average for the overall journey. We can then see some maximums as well, so you can see the apparent wind speed, we hit about 33 knots. Boat speed got up, over ground at least, to 11.8, and through the water, 8.2. So we also had a bit of current helping us along there. But yeah, pretty fast sail. I can get to review it. What's nice is I can also click into the logs relating to that journey and see everything that took place. As you see, quite a lot of things, including a lot of autopilot changes took place. And once again, I can come in and say, like, let's get rid of those autopilots. They're going to clean things up. And now I'm seeing sail changes and who logged in and out at different times, which would be our crew changeovers, that kind of thing. If I had any pictures attached, I could also see them collected here, so I can review the entire passage that way. One last feature we have in here that I quite like is this little video icon up top. If I select that, this shows what Zora recorded every single moment of that journey. You can see the heading, the wind, and the speed through water being displayed in that circle at the bottom, along with our time and whether or not it was motoring, sailing, etc., and our trip journey, our trip log, how long the trip was. We can actually scroll through this by hand, and we can see right here that we have a Genoa and a Maine deployed, and that we're sailing. And if I keep scrolling a little bit further, you'll see there was a bit of a strange change in our course. This was actually when we decided to drop the sails and head more downwind so that we could make some food for dinner. It's quite a nice trick to do if you're on longer passages so that no one gets too seasick in the galley. But it's a nice way to relive it. And had I taken photos on this particular passage, that would be marked with pins all the way along this route, and I could stop and see those photos as we travel. So really, really clean and easy way to review a journey. So Zora is all about safety. Safety for the person on board, safety for the crew, and of course the vessel itself. But if bad things happen, we do have the emergency button. That is this button up here in the top right. And the emergency button is something that we all hope you never have to use. As you can see, we've created a list of emergencies. Some are more obvious than others. So we have our person overboard, mayday, pan, security, mayday relay. But we also have things like first aid, fire on board, and hull leak. These are going to give you directions as to where fire extinguishers are, or how to handle different types of first aid emergencies, and so on. But for this example, I'm just going to show you one of the most obvious ones, which is mayday. Now, typically when maydays happen on board, people do panic. It's not a good situation to have to call one, and it takes a very special person to remain level-headed. And so, to make this as simple as possible, we actually made it that Zora displays a step-by-step guide of what to do when you're calling a mayday. It makes sense, right? So we said we want to call a mayday, and here you can see it tells us what to do on our DSC on the radio. We can step through the steps required, and once we complete that, we hit the little thumbs up icon. Next up, on your VHF, check you're on a high power, check you're on channel 16. Press the button on the transmit microphone. Okay. Say slowly and clearly the following script, right? Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is boat name. It's populated it for us here, Indioko. That's where we are. Now, if we were struggling to spell Indioko for anybody, we can even go over here to the vessel name and tap on it. And there it is. India, November, Delta, India, Oscar, Kilo, Oscar. I've never said it so quickly without having to think halfway through. So really easy to do. Again, your position automatically stored and displayed for you. And then the script. I am sinking. I'm on fire. I have a major injury. It might be something of that sort. What kind of assistance you actually require. You fill in the gaps there. How many people are on board. Describe your vessel. And then once you're done, say out and click OK. And the last option here is to say, when you've done all of that, hit this green button. And when we do, you'll notice that Zora goes back to your navigation, because you're underway, you want to see what you're doing. But also, the emergency button is now flashing. So many people forget that an emergency like a mayday isn't just called out, but has to be cancelled afterwards. So to stop people accidentally only calling the mayday and forgetting that it needs to be cancelled, perhaps the emergency is resolved, assistance is provided, you have to let everyone else know that that has happened. So to do that, we just tap on that mayday button again. By selecting it, you'll notice that mayday is already highlighted, and it has the time at which we triggered the mayday. By tapping on that, we go back to our mayday menu, and you'll see that this is telling us how to repeat the call so that we can stay on top of our mayday if we didn't hear a response. However, let's say all is well. I really hope it is. We click on the cancel or resend button here, and that will change our script to say, how do you cancel a mayday? Well, follow these simple steps, and when you're done, hit that green button. And you'll notice that our emergency scenario has been cancelled, our emergency light has stopped flashing, and most importantly, hiding in our logbooks is the mayday call that we just did and the cancel. So we can see exactly where we were when we called it and where we were when we ended it. All stored automatically in your logbook, and in that scenario, quite possibly handed to your insurance company or any other first responders. It gives you a full, clean, itemized ordering, exactly what a logbook should be. Now, believe it or not, I've barely scratched the surface of Zora. There is so much packed into this system, but we try to give you a sense of the basic navigation and chart plotter type features that exist within the platform. So already we've covered the PND, the charts, we've covered some of the logbook features and the emergency side of things, amongst a few other extra bits and pieces around. However, I will give you a quick look at the systems side of Zora as well. I'm not going to get into this in as much detail because that'll be good for another video, but just to give you a sense of the power that's hiding behind the scenes. So if we head up to our screens button one more time, and we've done navigation, we've done journal, so we head to systems. And here you'll see a variety of different screens. Just to give you a sense of what they can do, I'm actually going to start with the management screen here, this one with the nice colored rectangles on it. So this is a way that we use to track our projects on board. First of all, we have usually the idea, the concept, what we'd like to do, and we have plenty of those. Then we have things that become necessary, so they go into the to-do column. So you simply click and drag into the to-do column, and now that is needing to happen. Let's say we need to then actually get started on it, so we start putting it into progress. We would simply click and drag it in progress. Now, along the way, we can actually add a logbook to this. By tapping, I can see when it was created, when it's been pushed through the pipelines. We understand how long it's taking, any additional comments, logbooks and finances for how much we might have spent on the project already. But we can also then add logs to this and say, well, this is day 5 and we've discovered the problem isn't what we thought it was, but we're going to buy another part, whatever it may be. There's a story attached to the project. And once it's complete, bring it across to done, and it's logged as done. So that particular project has actually gone through an entire timeline, and Zora has logged every step of the way, what happened and what you've added to that messaging, including photos, notes, etc. What's really neat about this is we can actually filter each of these tasks down by system or by user that we've assigned it to. So if a crew member is particularly good at, say, sewing, we could filter this entire screen to only show the sewing projects, so that crew member goes down the list, picks their favorite one and takes it through to completion. Equally, the captain of the vessel can keep track of who's assigned to what, and if they've overloaded a particular crew member, they can reassign to somebody else. And because we've assigned these to individual systems, we can filter to say, only show me the system that I'm worried about right now, like the outboard. And then you can check all the to-dos, what's in progress and what's being completed. It's a really clean way to keep track and essentially replaces the typical post-it note wall that people get into. We use this almost every day to keep track of our tasks, and so much so I'm even going to put that one back in the inbox because I don't want to trick myself into thinking I've done more work than I actually have. The other aspect of system is just over here in items. Now, there are a few other places I can show you this from, but this is the easiest way. Items lets us filter down into those individual systems or items on the boat. It can be where we store things, it can be what sails we already have in our sail loft. It can also be things like going into our engines, propulsion, port engine with a nice picture to remind me what the engine looks like. And there I can get information from the manufacturer of what engine I have. I can review any documents attached to that engine. I can also go through our logs for the engine. Now this is just today, so there's no logs there, but I can jump around the calendar in the same way by clicking a date. And then again, I mentioned finances and history, so you can track the costs, the running costs of your engine over time. The older things get, quite often the more expensive they cost to keep them alive. So this is a nice way to monitor that expense over time and keep track of your cruising kitty as well. Now lastly, I did mention logbooks and we've seen those in action. This is the logs for every single system on the boat. So I'm not going to take you through all of those, but they essentially display in the same way as our sailing log does. The final point is documents, and this one has been a game changer. If you're like me, you probably travel with a couple of binders full of manuals, service notifications, recall notes, receipts, everything stashed out in this big binder or binders, and tends to get quite ratty and damaged over time. Zora has an entire library ready and waiting to be filled with those documents. So we no longer carry the paper manuals. We actually store all of our paperwork in Zora as scans, PDFs, even photos that allow us to then review those by simply going to the relevant system, opening the documents, and then I can have the service manual for my outboard right there on a phone or an iPad where I am actually sitting repairing the device. So now our paperwork doesn't get all covered in grease and oil. It also doesn't get kind of damaged with the heat of the day and water, of course. It lives forever in the cloud and in Zora's local storage. It's made a massive difference to us, and even down to finding parts, local cruising guides, you name it, we put it in here, and it's all filtered by system. So we can narrow down to exactly what we're looking for. You can see here that I can also add more documents, more finances, logbooks and tasks, all from one simple click. So that was something of a whistle-stop tour of the system, and there is so much more packed into Zora that we can show you. Our intention is to create a number of these videos breaking down those features in more detail, but if you have any questions or you'd like to look at applying Zora to your boat, please do get in touch. You can reach us through the website, drop us an email, and we can even arrange a video conference call with you to discuss your vessel needs specifically. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to hearing from you.